Here are 6 wide receivers that we really, really like in fantasy football right now. Drake London is going to be the first one here. With Drake London, this is a guy that you haven't necessarily seen prove that he can produce at a wide receiver 1 level and is being drafted at a wide receiver 1 price. He's currently the wide receiver 10 on Underdog Fantasy Football. So a lot of people are going to look at that with Drake London and say, that's a big red flag, and for that reason, I'm going to be avoiding Drake London. And I honestly can't describe to you how bad of a situation Drake London has been in the last 2 years. And yes, he's averaged 10.5 and 11 points per game in the last 2 years, which doesn't amount to hardly anything besides barely being flexible in fantasy football. And we totally acknowledge that. But with that being said, this is a guy that had 109 targets last year in an offense where they threw the ball as little as almost any team in the NFL. This is a guy who had Desmond Ridder throwing him the ball last year.
This is a guy who had Arthur Smith as his head coach.
This is a guy who was 36th in the league in catchable target rate. This is a guy who had 2 touchdowns last year total, because when you're looking at what he was able to do in the red zone, 22nd in red zone targets. This is a guy, it's a 6'4" wide receiver that was 22nd in the league in red zone targets. This is a guy that has Kirk Cousins coming to that offense, fresh new deal and fresh new pissed off attitude because they drafted another quarterback like right away. But Kirk Cousins coming off of an Achilles, there are plenty of questions there as well, but assuming that Kirk Cousins is ready for the season, which all reports are that he should be, Kirk Cousins is not only an upgrade, it's kind of the polar opposite of what you've seen from a quarterback standpoint in Atlanta for the last couple of years, because the last couple of years, you're talking about, from a fantasy perspective, the worst of the worst. I mean, let's even look. Like because I get why people are scared to take Drake London this high with the lack of proven production, and I get it. But like Desmond Ridder last year, he attempted 388 passes. He had 2,800 yards, completion percentage 64%, 7.3 yards per passing attempt. 7.3. 7 yards. I mean, oh my gosh, let's look at his efficiency. He was 35th in the league in accuracy rating. Do the math. There are 32 teams in the NFL, right? He was 25th in true completion percentage, right? He was 24th in clean pocket completion percentage. He was 29th in true passer rating. He was 25th in QBR. He was 31st in EPA. He was just not good. I don't think anybody would argue that, but again, like it's how much was that playing into Drake London's production last year and lack thereof, and in my opinion, in Nathan's opinion, a lot. A significant amount. Now you bring in a quarterback that can support a wide receiver 1. We've seen him support a wide receiver 1 and a tight end 1, right? And so you've got him and you've got Kyle Pitts, but Drake London is the clear alpha wide receiver in that offense. They didn't bring in a ton. There was definitely a world where the Falcons drafted another wide receiver. It would have been stupid, but as stupid as drafting a quarterback, who knows? But I know people are going to hate on me for that, but there was a world where Drake London has more competition than Darnell Mooney and Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts can be productive. Drake London can be productive in fantasy football, and Kirk Cousins can support them both. Drake London as a talent and as a route runner in his first couple of years, he's been efficient with the limited volume that he has, and his route running statistics are very good and very promising. Everything is set up for Drake London to break out this year. We're going to bet on that, and I honestly, if you have anything to support that, feel free, but...
Yeah, I have a fun fact for you guys.
All right, cool.
So Kirk Cousins, last year in the Vikings offense, the 8 weeks that he was healthy, he threw the ball 44, 44, 50, 19, 47, 31, 45, and 31 times. So that sounds like a lot of volume. You're like, okay, yeah, that's a lot. What production for the receiving assets in that offense did that actually turn out to be? Because if we're being honest, the receiving assets that he had last year were more talented than he has this year. Really, this year, it's just Drake London and Kyle Pitts.
Sure.
There are some guys after that, even Bijan Robinson, who's a good receiving threat as well in the backfield, but that's kind of a different
Jefferson and Hawk
type of threat.
They clear those guys.
Jefferson, Hawkinson, and Addison. Addison is a fresh rookie. A fresh rookie was able to average, when he was healthy, when these guys were all three on the field together, Jefferson, Hawkinson, and Addison, so that was the first 5 weeks of the season.
Yep.
J-Jeff had 22 points per game. Hawkinson had 16.5 points per game, and Addison had 15.5 points per game.
You're also bringing in an offensive coordinator that has played under or has called plays under Sean McVay, right? So you're coming from the Shanahan coaching tree, right?
Well, and he was, if I'm not mistaken, he was quarterbacks coach too, and he was one of the ones that would draw up the plays specifically in the passing game as well.
Yes.
He was like pass game.
And so you're not only betting on, Kirk Cousins, you're betting on Zach Robinson as well. So with that, I'm willing to make that bet this year. I think Drake London has all the upside in the world.
That's a lot of points per game to go around.
And even if you're like neutral on Drake London, I think avoiding him is just, you're playing a very risky game of missing somebody who could really be like a top 6 wide receiver in fantasy.
Should be nervous for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. The next guy we're going to have here is Calvin Ridley. We talked about him.
Yeah.
We can't stop talking about him, and we're not going to stop because honestly, this is a guy who last year, after not playing football for 2 years, remember this, he did not play football for 2 years. Don't forget that the expectations for Calvin Ridley last year were top 15 wide receiver expectations after not playing football for 2 years. So he goes out and puts up 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns, 136 targets for 76 receptions, and we're disappointed. We're disappointed? Why were we disappointed from that? It was because the price, again, was too high to begin with. But how did he lose value this year? Honestly, like, I understand there's questions with Will Levis. I understand there's questions with the Titans as a whole. And you'd probably prefer Trevor Lawrence to be throwing the ball to him than Will Levis. I understand that. But from a volume and production perspective, I don't think there's that much of a gap between Lawrence and Levis when it comes to like providing volume for the wide receivers to produce, especially not shots downfield. Levis ain't afraid to take shots downfield. That was something that Lawrence actually struggled with last year. I'm looking at Calvin Ridley getting pretty much the same amount of targets that he did last year.
Yes.
And probably turning more of them into receptions.
Yes. I agree with that. I mean, and here's the other thing. The perception around the Tennessee Titans is that, like, okay, the Tennessee Titans are bad for fantasy. You got Mike Vrabel, you got Derrick Henry, and you got...
That's done.
Wait.
It's a clean slate.
You've got... Who's their head coach?
Callahan. Bill Callahan, coming from the Cincinnati Bengals. Oh, yeah. Sorry, Bill Callahan is his dad, who's the O-line coach now for the Titans. Brian Callahan is coming from Cincinnati, and he's known for changing that offense mid-season a couple years ago when they were really struggling and like turning over the playbook overnight pretty much.
Yeah.
And they built the system that was a lot more friendly for Joe Burrow's capabilities and what he's so good at and what that offense was so good at. And that was centered around the passing game and doing a lot of things in shotgun, which is going to really incentivize you to pass the ball a lot more and give the ball to your weapons like Calvin. Like they spent a lot of they've put a lot of investment in the wide receiver position specifically this offseason to help Will Levis develop. Like, don't expect, we like Tony Pollard a lot in his value right now, and we think he's going to be pretty productive given his respective price in fantasy. We think Tyjae Spears has an avenue to be productive as well. But if I'm betting on anyone on that offense, it's going to be the receiver first because of how Callahan has developed an offensive scheme around Joe Burrow and those assets. Again, is it going to look like that exactly? Is it going to be just as productive as the Bengals? No, because the talent is not even close to what Cincinnati has in Burrow, Chase, and Higgins. But it'll be a diet version of that. And at Calvin Ridley's price in fantasy right now, it's going to be worth taking him.
All right, let's talk about George Pickens now. And George Pickens, fun fact, last year, he was a wide receiver 1 in fantasy football in 4 games, and that's great. The problem with George Pickens is that George Pickens finished as the wide receiver 45 or lower 10 games last year. He is not only like hit and miss, he's like hit and miss and then hit again. So with George Pickens, there's a lot of questions. However, when you're looking at George Pickens and where he's being drafted in fantasy football right now, and you're looking at the context behind what his situation has been in the last couple of years, he's a wide receiver 28. He is the wide receiver 1 in Pittsburgh. In my opinion, them taking away Deontay Johnson was a big deal. And
it is a big deal.
Well, I want to give props to Roman Wilson as somebody that I liked very early in the draft process.
He is not Deontay Johnson.
Not even anywhere in the stratosphere of Deontay Johnson. Deontay Johnson has been top 10 in targets in targets over the last 2 years or 3 years in the NFL or something like that. Deontay Johnson's top 10.
And objectively one of the best route runners.
He is elite. He is elite at what he does. Even if not for fantasy, he's a very good NFL wide receiver. And so with George Pickens, yes, he's hit and miss. And a lot of times, you're betting on those weeks where he has, 2 touchdowns and 2 of them are for 30 yards. And then also the weeks where he doesn't do anything and he has 0 targets or 2 targets. Like, I get that. The context is similar to the Drake London situation where, Kenny Pickett was his quarterback last year.
Mason Rudolph, Mitch Trubisky.
The quarterbacks that he's played with, I cannot tell you how bad that they have been. Kenny Pickett was awful. 29th. And we talked about 7 yards per attempt for Desmond Ridder, 6.5 yards per attempt for Kenny Pickett. I am very aware that Matt Canada was also terrible. I get that. Like, he absolutely was. Kenny Pickett, 33rd in accuracy rating, 31st in true completion percentage, 28th in true passer rating, 24th in QBR. Kenny Pickett was the guy that everybody was like, okay, maybe he's going to take a step up next year. This is not a guy that was capable of supporting a wide receiver one from fantasy perspective, not even close. And George Pickens, from a talent perspective, do we think he's like an elite target earner? No, we don't. And we've never thought that. But that being said, when we're talking about drafting him at wide receiver 30, where he finished last year, the wide receiver 30 in fantasy football, in that situation, he's being drafted in the same spot as he finished last year with a significantly better situation. And the reason I use the word significantly better with Russell Wilson at quarterback and I guess potentially Justin Fields is because they're significantly better than Kenny Pickett is. Yeah. And the offense is going to be significantly better than a Matt Canada offense.
Don't underestimate Arthur Smith as an offensive coordinator. An offensive coordinator, not a head coach, an OC.
And I think that's what's scaring a lot of people off. Some people may not even know that Arthur Smith is in Pittsburgh, but
that's actually a pro.
It is a pro.
That's a pro for their offensive scheme.
He is worlds better than Matt Canada. And so for George Pickens, like, I'm going to bet that he's still going to hit that floor. 106 targets last year, 30th in PPR points last year among wide receivers. I'm going to bet that he can hit that floor. And I'm probably going to bet that he can finish as like a high end. No, probably in the early 20s would be his ceiling this year. And I think I think he's pretty safe because, again, they're going to be throwing the ball more and they have nobody there. They have nobody. Who is his?
Yeah, and what's the risk? Maybe they just run the frick out of the ball all the time.
Maybe.
And that's absolutely a possibility. It wouldn't surprise me just with the way that Pittsburgh is and has been for a very long time. They want to get back to the Steeler way and all this stuff. But look, you got to take a shot on the guy who's a wide receiver one in an offense who has shown in sample sizes that he can be very productive in worse situations. And when you're looking at the guys that are going back to back with them, like T. Higgins is going in that range. I see a reason to take T. Higgins there, but again, you can't deny that he is a wide receiver too in his own offense. And he has failed to ever be as productive as people have expected him to be over the past multiple years. Josh Jacobs, we are both notably very low on Josh Jacobs and what his outlook is going to be even in fantasy this year. And I think there's a lot of questions there. We like what Marshawn Lloyd could offer in that offense as well as kind of a sleeper pick. Who else is going there? Amari Cooper. Personally, I prefer Amari Cooper. But again, George Pickens, I think, is a great pick there still. Pacheco hasn't even been a running back one.
Right.
He's running back 15 last year. That was his best year ever. And they just brought in more wide receivers. Like, he'll be a really good NFL asset for a team that needs to use him, and he'll continue to be that. And that means less for fantasy than it does for real life. So Take a shot on Pickens when you can. Next guy we're going to have here is, I did just mention Pacheco in the Chiefs offense. Let's talk about Rashee Rice, who's in that same offense. Everyone knows, it's very well documented at this point. Rashee has a fast car. Rashee might get suspended for a few games. But guess what it's going to be? It's going to be a few games. The NFL has shown time and time again that things like this, they don't really care that much about, at least from a suspension perspective. It'll likely be, I'm no lawyer, but I would guess probably no more than 6 games.
I think that's on the high end. I think it's 3 or 4.
No more than 6.
I bet it's 3. I look what Kamara got.
I know.
Like, and not to mention,
Kamara beat the crap out of the guy.
I know.
On camera.
I mean, and Rashee Rice, the photographer thing, the charges got dropped in that one. So you're really only looking at the car situation. And yes, Rashee does have a fast car. And yeah, it was a very serious incident and obviously, not a good one there. But with Rashee Rice.
We're talking about fantasy football.
And if you play fantasy football with your emotions, like, you might not win at fantasy football. And Rashee Rice, like, my emotions tell me right now that I get really happy when I see Rashee Rice as the wide receiver 47 in ADP. Like that. This is a guy that finishes the wide receiver 27 in his rookie year. He's playing in Patrick Mahomes' offense. Yes, you add Hollywood Brown to that offense, and I think that is probably going to have some effect on the type of targets that Rashee Rice is going to get, and Travis Kelce back on the
Xavier
deal.
Worthy is going to help to stretch the field, which is going to open up the short to intermediate game as well, which is where Rashee Rice's bread and butter is.
I feel like his floor is 50, so you're drafting him at his floor essentially. That's why I like him as a pick.
Well, yeah, and guys, this is going to be something that we preach literally all offseason leading up to 2024. I will say it again and again and again, and I will not get tired of it. You play fantasy football for the end of the season. not for the first 4 weeks. This is why Alvin Kamara was such a good value last year. This is why Breece Hall and Jahmyr Gibbs were such good values last year. You've got to play the long game with Rashee Rice, and it's not even that long of a game. It's not that long. He's not going to be out for very long. Don't worry about it. Take the shot with the risk at wide receiver 50.
I mean, and you're getting him at such a cheap price that even if he is out, you're going to have drafted enough guys before him that it's not going to kill you to have him out for the first couple of weeks. So Jaden Reed's our next guy. He's going as the wide receiver 34 right now in ADP, and he's a guy that finished his rookie year as a wide receiver 25. And basically what this is, we've actually seen him go a lot lower in ESPN leagues and seen Christian Watson jump him.
It's the Christian Watson effect.
And Christian Watson, granted, like nobody's very confident drafting him as well, or Dontavian Wicks, or Romeo Doubs. Nobody wants to guess who the wide receiver 1 is in Green Bay, and we're guessing that it's Jaden Reed. And so for Jordan Love to have success this year, I think that Jaden Reed also has to be productive again. He's talking about a guy that was 16th last year in slot snaps. We like slot snaps. Why? Because we see slot receivers and players in fantasy players in particular playing out of the slot be productive at a higher rate. Talking about a guy that got 14 red zone targets, even though he's not a huge guy, right? But this is a guy that did a lot on really not a ton of opportunity. He was only 49th in the league in target share. He had a 17.5% target share. He only had 94 targets last year. And he had 10 touchdowns. And so that is the one red flag with Jaden Reed is it had so many touchdowns. You have to see him not be touchdown dependent. But that being said, his efficiency was pretty good. He was 27th in yards per route run last year. And so for a guy that really didn't have any expectations as a rookie, we look at that and we say that that's pretty good. And it's basically just how many targets does he get this year? Is it over or is it under 94? And when you're talking about drafting him at wide receiver 34, I think again I think his floor is a little bit lower than wide receiver 34. So this is maybe a little bit more of a risky one. I do think he has a floor in the 40s because if Christian Watson and then one of Wicks or Doubs balls out this year, maybe Jaden Reed isn't as productive. But naturally, you expect a guy who came out as a rookie and played like that to take a little bit of a step up and progress in his career and progress in his skill set. You also expect that offense to be pretty good again this year and for Jordan Love to have another year under his belt. And I like Jaden Reed's consistency more than I've seen out of Christian Watson, to be honest with you, from a fantasy perspective at least. And so with that, I'll bet on Jaden Reed being the wide receiver 1 in Green Bay. And I like his price right now, so I'll take him at wide receiver 34 in fantasy.
Yeah, I completely agree. And when you're looking at his production over the latter half of the season, we got an interesting note from one of our supporters over at flockfantasy.com. He was telling us about Jaden Reed's production from like weeks 10 on-ish compared to Puka Nakua's, who Puka Nacua, everyone knows, going first round consensus pretty much in fantasy right now. And it is not that far off. In fact, it's pretty dang similar. They are neck and neck. Jaden Reed averaging 17 points per game from weeks 11 to 18. Puka Nacua averaging 17.4 points per game over that
right
range.
there.
And again, that's a smaller sample size in an entire season. But when you're looking at the price and where Jaden Reed is going right now, you look at that potential upside. We see how high Puka Nacua has been boosted up boards, and that should be happening. Why is it not happening with Jaden Reed after the finish that he had last season?
He finished the year great. You can't really deny it.
Yeah, and it wasn't touchdown dependent. He only had one more touchdown than Puka in that range.
Yep.
So it was really, really good, really nice to see for an improvement from a rookie.
Yeah.
Like he's not going to be a rookie anymore, and he's tied to Jordan Love. Yeah. So last guy we're going to have here is Deontay Johnson. We already mentioned him, alluded to him a little bit when we were talking about George Pickens, but Deontay Johnson is, it's as simple as this. Adam Thielen for like 2/3 of the season was a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. As a 33-year-old, washed-up wide receiver who's a shell of what he used to be and can barely run, and somehow he's still playing. And Deontay Johnson is worlds better going into the same situation, but better because there's an actual head coach, not named Frank Reich, who works wonders with quarterbacks and has historically with Baker Mayfield and Geno Smith. That's Dave Canales is the head coach for Carolina now. So you're looking at improved volume, improved opportunity, improved scheme, and an improved wide receiver core. And a big part of that is Deontay Johnson. Deontay Johnson is the weapon to help Bryce Young develop, and he will get the volume that he needs to be productive there. Count on wide receiver 2 production. Count on it.
Bold.
How's it bold? How's it bold after we saw what Adam Thielen did last year? He's an inferior wide receiver.
He is. That's true. We haven't seen Deontay Johnson since 2021 put up a season where he was.
Have we seen Deontay Johnson with an actual quarterback?
No, and that's part of it. I mean, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it's bold.
So tell me about the targets that he's had the last couple of years with that quarterback play.
In 13 games last year, he had 87 targets. The year before, 147 targets. So that was the year he scored 100. He had 147 targets, only caught 86 of them, and had 0 touchdowns. Yeah. So like he had the targets and nothing else. The year before that obviously was his wide receiver 8 year, 169 target, 170 targets. But that was Ben's last year, right? 2021.
Yes,
that
2021 was his last year.
Yes.
Yep.
And so again,
he wasn't much better than Kenny Pickett.
Kenny Pickett, like, no, but he could at least he was better. He was better. He was still better.
Well,
Kenny Pickett was bad.
Pickett's rookie season wasn't horrible. He was better his rookie season.
It was bad for fantasy purposes.
Yeah, you're right.
But Ben couldn't move his last year. But the point is, Deontay Johnson, he draws targets at an elite rate, and when you have a guy like that, and if I don't think it's a bad take, I just think it's bold, but I wouldn't be surprised at all.
They had the worst offense last year in Carolina. One of the worst offenses last year, and Thielen brought in 137 targets.
There you go. So
and brought in 103 of them, which shows you what type of receiver he was playing, which is a short to intermediate receiver. That is what Deontay Johnson does. That's what he does. Like he's going to be the slot wide receiver.
Yeah. All right, let us know what you think in the comments. Do us a huge favor. If you play fantasy, drop a like on this video and make sure you subscribe. Those two things really help us grow our channel and support Nathan and I as we try to grow this thing to be bigger. And it also really directly supports how we're able to do research and things like that. So like and subscribe. We appreciate it. Thanks for watching today, guys. We'll see you later.